Ambassador Kim Tae-woo stepped through the massive airlock doors of the Galactic Council station, his black diplomatic uniform pressed to perfection. The station stretched out before him like a crystal cathedral, its walls gleaming with alien technology that humanity could barely understand, or so the aliens believed. The corridors buzzed with activity as dozens of different species went about their business. Tall insect-like beings with razor-sharp mandibles clicked past him without a second glance. Floating jellyfish creatures pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that probably meant they were laughing at him. Six-legged reptilian diplomats hissed quietly among themselves, their forked tongues tasting the air with obvious disgust when they caught his human scent. Park So-young, his assistant, walked silently beside him. She carried a simple leather briefcase that looked almost primitive compared to the holographic storage devices the other species used. Her face showed no emotion, but Tae-woo could sense her tension. She knew what he knew. This wasn't going to be a normal diplomatic meeting. As they made their way toward the Central Council chamber, the whispers grew louder. The aliens weren't even trying to hide their contempt anymore. "Look at them," chittered a purple-skinned delegate with many eyes, walking around on just two legs like broken furniture. "I heard they still use chemical rockets to leave their planet," added another voice, this one belonging to a creature that looked like a walking tree made of metal. How embarrassingly primitive. Tae-woo had heard it all before. Every species in the galaxy seemed to think humans were nothing more than clever animals who had accidentally stumbled into space travel. They looked at Earth's representatives and saw soft pink skin, weak muscles, and technology that seemed centuries behind their own. What they didn't see was the real reason humanity had survived everything their harsh planet had thrown at them. For millions of years, the council chamber doors opened with a sound like singing crystal. Inside, representatives from 47 different species sat in a perfect circle, their various chairs and platforms designed to accommodate every type of alien biology imaginable. At the center of the circle sat the most important figure in this part of the galaxy, Grixtel, the Vorthak Council leader. Grixtel was a nightmare made real. His species had evolved from something like a cross between a spider and a shark, and it showed. 8 legs supported a body covered in chitinous armor that gleamed like black metal. His face was a collection of compound eyes and clicking mandibles that could probably bite through steel. When he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding glass. "Ah, the humans have arrived," Grixtel announced, not bothering to look up from the holographic reports floating in front of him. "I was beginning to think you had gotten lost trying to operate our airlocks." Laughter rippled through the chamber. Not the kind of laughter you share with friends, but the cruel kind that cuts deep and leaves scars. Tae-woo bowed politely, the perfect picture of diplomatic courtesy. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Council Leader Grixtal. Earth is honored by this opportunity." "Honored," repeated Grixtal, finally raising his head to fix all 8 of his eyes on the human ambassador. "How delightfully primitive. Tell me, little mammal, what exactly do you think you can offer to civilizations that were building starships when your species was still learning to make fire?" The insult hit exactly as intended. Around the circle, alien representatives leaned forward slightly, eager to watch the human squirm. Some species found entertainment in the suffering of others, and humanity's reputation as a weak, emotional race made them perfect targets for this kind of psychological warfare. But Tae-woo didn't squirm. His smile remained perfectly in place, though something shifted behind his dark eyes. It was subtle, like the way the air feels different right before a thunderstorm hits. "We bring what we've always brought," Tae-woo replied calmly. "Adaptability." Grixtal's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Adaptability? Is that what you call it when a species is too weak to specialize? Every other race in this galaxy has evolved to master their environment. We Vorthak conquered the vacuum of space itself. The Zilithians learned to manipulate gravity with their minds. The Chromatic Empire built machines that think faster than any biological brain ever could." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the chamber. "And what did humans do? You learned to eat anything, live anywhere, and breed like a virus. You call that a strength, but we know what it really is. Desperation. Park So-young's grip tightened almost imperceptibly on her briefcase. Tae-woo noticed, and his smile grew just a fraction wider. You're absolutely right, he agreed, his tone so pleasant it was almost cheerful. Humans are desperate. We're desperate to survive, desperate to grow, desperate to learn. It's made us very good at certain things. Such as? Grixtal's voice dripped with disdain. Such as recognizing when someone is trying to kill us. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The casual chatter died away, as every alien in the chamber suddenly focused on the human ambassador with new attention. Tae-woo straightened his tie, a gesture so mundane and human that it somehow made the moment even more unsettling. But please, he continued, don't let me interrupt your dinner preparations. I'm sure the atmospheric adjustments you've planned will be quite educational. The formal dinner began exactly 3 hours after the initial meeting, held in the station's grand banquet hall. The room was a marvel of alien engineering, with tables that adjusted automatically to accommodate every species' unique dining requirements. Crystal formations grew from the ceiling, providing soft multicolored light that was supposed to be soothing to all known biological systems. Ambassador Kim Tae-woo sat at the human delegation's assigned spot, a simple rectangular table that looked almost embarrassingly plain compared to the elaborate setups around him. The Vorthak delegation had a table that resembled a massive spider web, allowing Grixtal and his companions to hang upside down while they ate. The Zilithian representatives floated in tanks of luminescent liquid, their meal consisting of energy, patterns that danced through the water like living lightning. Park So-young sat beside Tae-woo, her expression politely interested as she watched the various alien species consume their respective foods. Some ate what looked like metallic crystals that dissolved on their tongues. Others absorbed nutrients directly through their skin by pressing against specially designed feeding surfaces. A few species didn't seem to eat at all, instead drawing energy from small devices that hummed with barely contained power. The human. Food, by comparison, looked almost primitive. Simple proteins, vegetables, and grains arranged in patterns that would have been familiar to anyone from Earth. Tae-woo ate slowly, savoring each bite while engaging in polite conversation with the few alien representatives who bothered to acknowledge his presence. Tell me, Ambassador, said Velthar, a delegate from the crystalline collective whose body looked like living gemstone, how does it feel to know that your entire species' technological advancement happened by accident? We've studied your history. You discovered space travel while trying to build better weapons to kill each other. Tae-woo chewed thoughtfully before responding. I suppose it's similar to how your species discovered interstellar communication while trying to find better ways to harvest rare minerals. Motivation doesn't change the result, does it? The casual deflection of the insult caught Velthar off guard. Around the room, other conversations began to die down, as more aliens tuned in to watch the human being slowly humiliated. This was, after all, part of the entertainment for the evening. But something was wrong. The air circulation system, which had been running smoothly all day, began to make strange noises, a low humming that gradually rose in pitch until it became almost uncomfortable to hear. The atmospheric processes that maintained the perfect environment for all 47 species were working harder than usual. Grixtal was the first to notice the readings on his personal environmental scanner. His compound eyes widened as he processed the information. The atmospheric composition was changing, but not in the way it should be for normal dinner service. There seems to be a malfunction, he announced to the room, though his voice carried no real concern. If anything, he sounded almost pleased. The atmospheric processes are releasing emergency purification gases. The gas was invisible, but its effects became apparent quickly. Several of the more sensitive species began to show signs of distress, their breathing becoming labored. Emergency masks dropped from hidden compartments in the ceiling, standard safety equipment that every species knew how to use. Tae-woo reached for his mask, just like everyone else, fitting it over his face with practiced ease. The clear plastic material fogged slightly with his breath, and he continued eating as if nothing unusual was happening, but the gas levels kept rising. What had started as a minor inconvenience quickly became something more serious. The masks were designed for short-term emergency use, not prolonged exposure to whatever was flooding the chamber. Park So-young checked her readings and whispered urgently to Tae-woo. "Sir, these aren't purification gases. This is nexethane compound. It's lethal to most oxygen-breathing species." Tae-woo nodded calmly and kept eating his dinner. Around the room, other delegates were beginning to panic as their masks started failing. The gas was too concentrated, too pure. It was eating through the filter systems faster than they could process it. Then Tae-woo's mask made a soft hissing sound and went dark. The filter had failed completely, just like the others. He looked down at it with mild interest, as if this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The aliens watched with barely concealed anticipation. Finally, the arrogant human would learn what happened to species that overreached. Grixtal's mandibles clicked in what might have been satisfaction as he watched through his own high-grade military mask. Tae-woo stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Every eye in the room fixed on him as he reached up and carefully removed his failed breathing apparatus. The mask came away from his face with a soft pop, leaving him completely exposed to the toxic atmosphere. The chamber held its breath, waiting for the human to collapse, to gasp, to beg for help. Some species even had their recording devices ready to capture the moment for later study. Instead, Tae-woo took a deep, slow breath of the poisoned air. Then another. His chest rose and fell normally, his skin maintained its healthy color, and his eyes remained clear and focused. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying perfectly through the chamber without any sign of distress, "I believe you've misunderstood human capabilities." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the humming of the atmospheric processes seemed to fade away as every alien in the room stared at the impossible sight before them. Grixtal's chitinous plates began to rattle against each other, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice amplified by his mask's communication system. "Our scans showed you required life support. Your biology matched our databases perfectly." Tae-woo smiled, and for the first time since arriving at the station, it wasn't the polite diplomatic expression he'd been wearing all day. This smile had teeth in it. "Your scans showed exactly what I wanted them to show," he replied, loosening his tie with one hand while breathing the deadly air as easily as if it were a spring breeze on Earth. "Did you really think we would send an unmodified human to negotiate? With species that consider poisoning their dinner guests to be acceptable diplomatic protocol?" From his worn leather briefcase, Tae-woo slowly pulled out what looked like a simple black cube, no bigger than his palm. The moment it appeared, every single alien in that massive chamber took an involuntary step backward. Their confident postures crumbled instantly. Fear flickered across faces that had moments before been filled with arrogance and superiority. "Oh, this little thing?" Tae-woo asked casually, as if he was showing off a new phone. "It's what we call a quantum communicator. Pretty neat technology, really. Want to see who I've been chatting with?" He pressed a small button on the device's surface. The air in the chamber seemed to shimmer and bend, like heat waves rising from hot pavement on a summer day. The alien's massive viewing screen, which had been displaying star charts and battle formations, suddenly went completely black. Then something impossible happened. Space itself began to fold, not on the screen, but actually in the space behind it, as if reality was being crumpled like a piece of paper. The very fabric of existence twisted and curved inward, creating a tunnel through dimensions that shouldn't exist. What emerged from that impossible fold in space made even the most hardened alien warriors gasp in shock. It was a structure so massive, it defied comprehension. Imagine taking every skyscraper from every major city on Earth and combining them into one single floating fortress. Now multiply that by 100. The thing that appeared was easily the size of a small moon, but it moved with the grace and precision of a living creature. Its surface wasn't smooth metal like typical spaceships. Instead, it was covered in billions of tiny pulsing lights that shifted and changed patterns constantly. Geometric shapes flowed across its hull like living tattoos, reorganizing themselves every few seconds. Massive spires jutted out at impossible angles, each one crackling with energy, that made the space around them bend and warp. Strange appendages extended from various points on the structure. Some looked like mechanical arms, others like organic tentacles, and still others defied any earthly comparison. They moved independently, each one performing tasks that the alien council couldn't even begin to understand. But perhaps most unsettling of all were the eyes. Scattered across the surface of this city-sized vessel were what could only be described as massive glowing eyes. They blinked slowly, each one the size of a football stadium, and they all seemed to be looking directly at the alien council chamber. "Council members," Taewoo said with a slight smile, "I'd like you to meet Hana." The name hung in the air for a moment before he continued. "That stands for Human Adaptive Neural Architecture. She's been my traveling companion for quite some time now. Oh, and she's been watching your little performance here with tremendous interest." As if responding to her introduction, the massive structure pulsed with a warm, golden light. The patterns on its surface shifted to form what almost looked like a welcoming gesture, though executed on a scale that made mountains seem small. Then she spoke. The voice that filled the chamber was unlike anything the aliens had ever heard. It wasn't transmitted through speakers or communication devices. Instead, it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, the very air itself vibrated with her words. The sound was melodious and feminine, but underneath the beauty was an unmistakable undercurrent of power that made the chamber's foundations tremble. "Greetings, esteemed members of the Galactic Council," Hana said, her voice carrying the warmth of a favorite teacher, mixed with the authority of an ancient queen. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I've been observing your treatment of Ambassador Kim with great fascination." She paused, and in that silence, every alien in the room could feel her attention like a physical weight pressing down on them. "And I must confess," she continued, her tone growing noticeably cooler, "I find myself quite displeased with what I've witnessed." The word displeased seemed to echo through dimensions, causing the very space around the council chamber to flicker and warp. Several of the smaller alien species actually fainted from the pressure of her disapproval. General Vex, who had been so confident just minutes before, now looked like he wanted to crawl under his command chair. His multiple arms trembled as he tried to maintain his composure. "You see," Hana continued conversationally as if discussing the weather, "humans have this peculiar trait. We become remarkably protective of our own, and when someone threatens or mistreats a human under our care, well, the massive structure shifted slightly, and the movement sent ripples through space-time itself. Stars in the background seemed to bend around her presence. Let's just say we take it rather personally." Taewoo tucked the communicator back into his briefcase and straightened his tie. "I should probably mention," he added helpfully, "Hana represents what we call the Human Defense Initiative. She's not just a ship, she's an entire civilization's worth of knowledge, creativity, and protective instinct, all rolled into one very sophisticated package." The alien council members looked at each other with growing panic. Everything they thought they knew about humanity was crumbling before their eyes. The primitive species they'd been planning to conquer had just revealed technology that made their most advanced systems look like stone tools. "Now then," Taewoo said, settling back into his chair with the relaxed confidence of someone holding all the cards, "shall we discuss the terms of humanity's membership in your council? I think you'll find our proposal quite reasonable." In the background, Hana's massive form continued to pulse with that gentle but unmistakably powerful light, a constant reminder that humanity was far from the helpless species the aliens had assumed them to be. The moment Hana finished speaking, chaos erupted in the council chamber like a dam bursting. Every alien in the room abandoned any pretense of dignity and scrambled toward their emergency stations with pure terror driving their movements. General Vex lunged toward a massive red button on his command console, his 6 arms moving in desperate coordination. That button controlled the chamber's most powerful defense systems, energy shields that could withstand the blast of a dying star and weapons capable of cracking planets in half. He slammed his primary hand down on the button with enough force to crack the metal surface beneath it. Nothing happened, Not even a flicker of light or the softest beep to acknowledge his frantic input. Across the chamber, Ambassador Kethra was frantically swiping through holographic displays, trying to activate her species' legendary cloaking technology. The Zephyrians had perfected the art of becoming completely invisible and untouchable, able to phase out of reality itself when threatened. Her long, elegant fingers danced across control surfaces that had never failed her before. The displays showed all the right readings, indicated that the systems were fully functional, but her body remained stubbornly visible and solid. Council Leader Mordek had reached a communication console and was desperately trying to send distress signals to the massive fleet of warships orbiting just outside the station. His species had conquered half the galaxy with those ships. Surely they could handle one human structure, no matter how large. But the communication array sat silent and dead, offering no connection to the outside universe. One by one, every alien in that chamber came to the same horrifying realization. Every system they tried to access, every weapon they reached for, every emergency protocol they attempted to activate, all of it was completely unresponsive. Their technology, which had dominated the galaxy for thousands of years, had become nothing more than expensive decoration. Grixtal, the insectoid diplomat, who had spent days mocking human intelligence, stood frozen at his station. His compound eyes, which could see across multiple spectrums of light simultaneously, were darting frantically between displays that showed everything was functioning normally. But his exoskeleton, usually a source of pride and strength, was trembling so violently that his chitinous plates rattled together like wind chimes in a storm. "This is impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his own fear. "Our systems are quantum encrypted with security protocols that took millennia to develop. Nothing can penetrate them." Tae Wu, meanwhile, remained seated in his chair with the calm composure of someone enjoying a particularly pleasant afternoon tea. He straightened his tie again, a gesture that now seemed less nervous habit and more like the action of a predator grooming itself before a hunt. "You know," he said conversationally, his voice cutting through the panic like a knife through butter, "you folks did exactly what I expected you to do, very thorough, very professional. When I first arrived, you scanned me for weapons, found nothing dangerous. You tested my food and drink for toxins and poisons, all clean. You even checked my clothing and personal items for hidden devices or communication equipment." He paused to brush an imaginary speck of dust from his jacket sleeve. "The thing is," he continued with a slight smile, "you were looking for the wrong things entirely. You scanned for traditional weapons, but you never thought to look for quantum processors woven directly into the fabric of my suit. Each thread in this jacket contains computing power that exceeds your entire station's capabilities. Several aliens made choking sounds as they processed this information. And those blood tests you ran to make sure I wasn't carrying biological weapons? Well, you found my blood to be perfectly normal human blood. Which it is. You just didn't realize that every red blood cell has been modified to carry nanoscale transmitters smaller than viruses. For 3 days, every time my heart beat, I was broadcasting directly into your systems. The horror on the aliens' faces was almost comical as they realized the implications. Every moment Tae Wu had spent in their station, every breath he'd taken, every meal he'd eaten. He'd been quietly infiltrating their most secure networks. Hana's melodious voice filled the chamber again, but now it carried an edge of amusement that was somehow more terrifying than outright anger. "Your security systems are quite impressive," she said, her tone suggesting she was complimenting a child's drawing. "Quantum encryption, biometric locks, neural firewalls. Really, you should be proud. It took me almost 37 seconds to crack them all." The aliens who were still conscious recoiled as if physically struck. "Every network you possess is now under my direct control," Hana continued cheerfully. "Your defense grids, which you're so fond of using to threaten smaller species, now answer to me. Your financial systems, containing the economic data for half the galaxy, are mine to command. Your life support systems, the very air you breathe and the gravity that keeps you standing, all of it flows through my consciousness now." As she spoke, the lights in the chamber began to dim and brighten in rhythm with her words. a subtle demonstration of her complete control over their environment. But perhaps most interesting of all, Hana's voice took on a tone of scientific curiosity. "I've been analyzing your personal data networks, your private communications, your psychological profiles, your medical records, your personal histories. Such fascinating reading material." Suddenly, every alien in the chamber felt their personal communication devices vibrate simultaneously. They looked down to find messages waiting for them, private, personal messages that made their blood run cold. General Vex's device displayed detailed information about his secret fear of small enclosed spaces, a phobia that would destroy his military career if it became public knowledge. The message even included video footage of him having a panic attack in a supply closet the previous month. Ambassador Kethra's screen showed financial records proving she'd been embezzling funds from her own government for decades, along with communications between her and several black market dealers. One by one, each alien received messages containing their deepest, darkest secrets, things they thought were buried so deep that no one would ever discover them. The chamber fell into a silence so complete that the only sound was the collective breathing of terrified beings who had just realized they were completely and utterly at the mercy of the species they'd been planning to destroy. When the lights in the chamber slowly returned to their normal brightness, something fundamental had changed in the atmosphere. The aliens, who moments before had been scrambling in panic, now found themselves frozen in place by a sight that defied everything they thought they knew about human behavior. Tae Wu was no longer sitting politely in his assigned chair like a respectful guest. Instead, he had moved to perch casually on the edge of the massive conference table that dominated the center of the room. His legs dangled freely, and he sat with the relaxed confidence of someone who owned not just the table, but the entire building around it. Gone was the nervous diplomat, who had spent 3 days enduring their insults with patient smiles. The man sitting before them now radiated a quiet, controlled danger that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. His eyes, which had appeared so harmless before, now held the calculating gaze of a predator who had finished, playing with his prey. "Well then," Tae Wu said, his voice carrying an authority that commanded absolute attention, "now that we've gotten all the pleasantries out of the way, let me explain how things are going to work from now on." He paused to adjust his suit jacket with the same careful precision he'd shown throughout his visit. But now the gesture seemed less like nervous habit and more like a gunslinger checking his weapons. "You see, there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about humanity's intentions. We didn't come here seeking membership in your little exclusive club. We came here to restructure it entirely." As if responding to some unseen signal, every communication device, every computer screen, and every holographic display throughout the galaxy suddenly burst to life simultaneously. What appeared on them sent shockwaves through civilizations that had stood for thousands of years. Hana had not been idle during their conversation. In the time it took for the aliens to realize their systems were compromised, she had been systematically combing through every database, every secured file, and every classified document in their networks. Now, all of that information was being broadcast simultaneously to every citizen of every species across the galaxy. The Zephyrian population discovered that their beloved council leader, Kethra, had been selling their military secrets to their greatest enemies for decades. The warrior clans of Vex's homeworld learned that their celebrated general had been deliberately sending their bravest fighters to die in pointless battles to cover up his own cowardice. Species after species watched in horror as their most trusted leaders were exposed as corrupt, incompetent, or outright treacherous, but the revelations didn't stop at individual scandals. Hana methodically unveiled the systematic oppression that the Galactic Council had built their power upon. Smaller species discovered that their protection fees had been funding weapons that would eventually be used against them. Entire civilizations learned that their resources had been stolen under the guise of trade agreements that were nothing more than legalized theft. Within minutes, the financial markets that had controlled galactic commerce for millennia began to collapse like houses of cards in a hurricane. Currencies that had been stable for centuries became worthless as populations lost all faith in their governments. Trade routes that had operated for thousands of years ground to a halt as species refused to honor agreements they now knew were designed to exploit them. Meanwhile, the vast fleets of warships that had been quietly positioning themselves around Earth's solar system suddenly found themselves in very embarrassing situations. Their navigation systems, now under Hana's control, began routing them in elaborate circles through empty space. Some fleets found themselves accidentally firing their weapons at their own allies when their targeting systems mysteriously malfunctioned. Others discovered their ships heading straight toward the nearest star, with life support systems that refused to respond to desperate override attempts. Tae-woo watched the chaos unfold across multiple displays with the satisfaction of an artist, admiring a particularly well-executed masterpiece. "You asked me what makes humans special," he said, standing up from the table and straightening his suit jacket one final time. "The answer is actually quite simple. We don't just survive difficult situations, we adapt to them and then make them work in our favor. We don't just fight our enemies, we evolve beyond the need to fight them at all. And most importantly, when we create artificial intelligence, we don't make servants or slaves." He gestured toward the massive structure visible through the chamber's windows where Hana's form continued to pulse with that gentle but unmistakably powerful light. "We make partners, true partners, with shared goals and mutual respect." Hana's laughter filled the chamber again, but now it sounded less like amusement and more like the satisfied purr of a cat who had just caught a particularly clever mouse. "The ambassador is being modest," she said, her voice carrying warmth and affection when she spoke of Tae-woo, contrasted sharply with the ice-cold efficiency she'd shown toward the aliens. "I prefer to think of myself as humanity's very enthusiastic legal representative, and you've just provided me with the most interesting case I've had in centuries." As the days passed, the transformation was swift and complete. The once mighty Galactic Council, which had ruled through fear and intimidation for millennia, found itself reorganized under a new name, the Terran Protectorate. The same species that had spent 3 days trying to poison a human diplomat now competed desperately with each other for the privilege of serving humanity's interests. They offered tribute, technology, entire star systems, anything that might earn them a place in humanity's good graces. What they never quite understood was how they had gone from being the apex predators of the galaxy to becoming a protected species in less time than it took their homeworlds to complete a single rotation around their suns. Through all of these changes, Tae-woo maintained the same diplomatic smile he'd worn since his arrival. He remained unfailingly polite, continued to say please and thank you at appropriate moments, and never raised his voice or showed the slightest hint of anger toward his former captors. After all, good manners were what separated true civilization from mere chaos, even when that civilization happened to be built on the wreckage of those who had forgotten that humanity's greatest weapon was never their capacity for destruction. It was their capacity to make destruction completely unnecessary by rendering all resistance utterly impossible.